Well, as I mentioned, this final page of notes, page 16, this will be our final class on the book of Judges, and I have here Judges 20 and 21, so the last two chapters. Raise your hand if you read these two chapters in preparation for the class. Hey, good job. Raise your hand if you haven't. Some people neither have nor haven't. I like that. So, as you know, of course, we've been looking at the darkest period of God's people, at least as recorded in the Bible. And as the notes begin, it says, following the grisly carving of the Levites' ravished and murdered concubine, the entire nation is now called to consider what should be done in the face of such atrocity. Just that first sentence is pretty startling, isn't it? We looked at that story last week that's recorded in chapter 19 that we pointed out is not one you're going to hear in a children's Bible class, and you shouldn't hear it in a children's Bible class because it's not PG rated, it's not G rated. It's a terrible situation where a man throws his wife to the crowd, and they have their way with her all night until she dies of her injuries and the trauma. And it's unspeakable, and that's chapter 19. And then when the man gets up in the morning and sees his wife lying there on the ground, he callously just says, get up, it's time to go. Of course, she doesn't answer because she's dead. And then he takes her body and cuts it into 12 pieces and mails each piece to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And again, it's just like, how much crazier can things get? And what this is a call to consider the depths to which Israel has fallen and to call the 12 tribes together to execute judgment on this city and these men who were guilty of this moral crime. And that's how the chapter ended in the last verse of chapter 19 when it says, and so it was that all who saw it said, no such deed has been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt even until this day. Consider it, confer, and speak up. So that's the verse that says we've reached the bottom of the barrel as far as what God is recording for us in this period of Israel's history, and it's pretty black. And so chapters 20 and 21 are going to record the nation's response. They're going to consider this. They're going to see what's going on. Is that the kind of world you want to live in? Do you want to live in a kind of world where you have to look over your shoulder every second of the day when you walk out of your house? That you have to be terribly concerned about your children when you send them to school? Or when you go to the mall to go shopping and worry about hearing gunshots? Is that the kind of world you want to live in? And so that's basically what's being done here. It's like you're asking a question, is in such a morally depraved society, is there anything that will get people's attention? I mean, that's kind of a question. I'm going to be asking several questions in this because I have a lot of questions about what all is meant and what lessons we're supposed to take from it, because it seems such a mixed message. It's like, oh, well, here's a guy who wants to call all of Israel to consider how bad things are and to take action and to punish the offenders, and yet look what he did. He's one of them. He's the one who threw his wife out there to the dogs. He's the one who was so calloused when she was lying there dead on the ground. He was the one who cut her up into 12 pieces. It's like, I don't know what to make of all of this exactly, other than the things we've said before, that this just records for us the absurdities and the immoralities when God is left out of the picture, when there's no king in Israel, and when everyone does what is right in his own eyes. So that's how we introduce this. In verses 1 through 7 is the verses that I based that first statement on in the introduction. Let's read it. chapter 21 through 7. So all the children of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba. That's a way of saying as far north and as far south as the tribes were scattered. As well as from the land of Gilead. That's a way of saying on the other side of the Jordan River. So we're talking about all of the tribes are included in this. They're gathered together as one man before the Lord at Mizpah. And the leaders of all the people, all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 foot soldiers who drew the sword. So they're coming ready for battle. They're coming armed to the teeth. And these are not just, farmers and laborers. These are skilled soldiers. That's what it meant by who drew the sword. Verse 3, now the children of Benjamin heard that the children of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. Now this is going to be the tribe who's going to receive the anger and the hostility, right? Because Gibeah, the town where this took place, is a town of Benjamin. And so Benjamin is saying to themselves, oh, it looks like everybody's gathering over there, and we're going to have to respond somehow. Then the children of Israel said, tell us, how did this wicked deed happen? So they've received these body parts, and now they've all gathered together, and they want to hear, now, tell us the story. So the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, my concubine and I went into Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin, to spend the night, and the men of Gibeah rose against me, surrounded the house at night because of me. They intended to kill me, but instead they ravished my concubine so that she died. So I took hold of my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout all the territory of the inheritance of Israel, because they committed lewdness and outrage in Israel. So look now, all of you children of Israel, and give your advice and counsel here and now. So we'll talk about what he says here in just a second. So in verse 8, all the people arose as one man, saying, none of us will go to his tent, nor will any turn back to his house. But now this is the thing which we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot. So they're basically saying, we're not going to rest until justice is meted out here. So number 2 there in the introduction says, after a highly edited version of the story, the consensus of the nation is to eradicate the evil from the land by gathering against the city of Gibeah and, as we'll see, the supporting tribe of Benjamin. So I just had this under 2 main points as far as our discussion here. We'll talk about the war as quickly as we can. There's just a lot of verses here that cover it. And what I call the post-bellum reconstruction, that is the trying to reconstitute Benjamin after the destruction there, after the Civil War. And then finally, we'll talk about that phrase that I think is what's to govern all of these chapters. There's no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. All right, so let's go on to number 1 here, the Civil War. And so here's where I say their questions are abounding here in my mind. Is this a justified war against Benjamin? Now, the reason I ask that is because, of course, it was a city, Gibeah. And more than that, it was the elite, probably the leaders, the elite of the city, these men who had such depraved minds that they had given themselves over to homosexuality, and they were demanding that the man hand over this Levite in order to rape him. That's what they wanted to do. And instead, he threw his wife out there to him. So just the whole story is full of just great people, isn't it? It's just amazing. But I say, is this a justified war against Benjamin? Because, of course, the guilty people are the men of that city. And they end up going to war against the entire tribe. So that's a question. I think that one will be answered. It's not so hard here in a minute. But so verses 4 through 6 is the Levite story that we read. And I just ask here, is this a highly edited version of the story? Does it... you hear him give the explanation. If that's all you knew about it, you would think, man, he's innocent as all get. He's been, afflicted. He doesn't say, I threw her out there because I was trying to save my own hide. You know, he didn't say, give the full story here. He didn't talk about how he got up and spoke roughly to her even though she was dead on the ground there. It was all about him. It was all about him, wasn't it? My concubine and I went to Gibeah. The men of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house that night because of me, and they intended to kill me. So, I don't know. I'm just asking the question here, and I don't know if we're supposed to make a whole lot out of it or not. I'm just saying, you see how the text reads, and you know the fuller story because you've read 19, and it's just a strange situation here. It's all pretty black. Verses 7 through 11 rather, we read, where they say we're not going to go home until we go up against the city, Gibeah, by lot. Verse 10, we'll take 10 men out of every 100 through all the tribes and 100 out of every 1,000 and so forth. That when they come to Gibeah and Benjamin, they may repay all the vileness that they have done in Israel. So in other words, they're making their war plans and how to distribute the people. So all the men of Israel, verse 11, were united against the city, united together as one man. And I asked the question, is this selective outrage? You know what selective outrage is? It's when you live in a society that has a specific agenda and they get really angry at certain things that are wrong, but they embrace and promote other things that are equally wrong or worse. Selective outrage. Yeah, there's a lot of examples of it now. One of the more striking ones I saw, was that yesterday or the day before, on Dr. Phil, there was this woman who, you're going to think I'm making this up, but maybe you won't because you know the culture we live in. There was this woman who says she identified as a blind person. She always felt that she should be blind, even when she was young. So she blinded herself. And she put some kind of poison in her eyes. And so she was on Dr. Phil's show with the glasses on, and talking to Dr. Phil and these other couple of panelists, I guess. I don't know. But, okay. I mean, our stomachs would turn over at that, right? I feel sorry. I mean, this woman is sick. She's mentally sick is what I mean. I don't mean she needs help. And if you want to have compassion on her, what do? You try to get her the help she needs in order to act in harmony with what is reality. I mean, you know what I'm saying. But here's the point. One of the panelists was like, I'm sorry, I don't mean any offense to this woman, but it just makes my stomach turn. Just because you feel like you're born blind doesn't mean you should blind yourself and destroy your own body and so forth. So she's outraged at that, and rightly so. What is going on to our children who identify as some other gender in their thinking? Now they are actually destroying their bodies. The doctors are. The medical professionals will operate and cut off body parts and mutilate these children. But see, that is considered helping the child. That's considered embracing the child and respecting the child's sense of identity. So why are we upset about a woman blinding herself and embracing that practice? See the point? That's selective outrage. Well, it's because you have an agenda. It's because you're immoral at the core and you have an agenda. So the woman who's blind needs to say, hey, I'm just identifying as who I feel like I am. How can you condemn me and yet promote this over here? And again, I don't know the personal politics of the woman who was outraged. I'm saying that's an example of, that those promoting the current transgender agenda cannot be consistent. So back to our text, I'm asking, is this selective outrage? They see this terrible atrocity. And the reason I ask that is because, do you remember at the end of the story in chapter 18, the tribe of Dan stole those images, stole the priest from Micah's house, and when they set up their own place up north in their own tribal territory, they set up all those idols and began worshiping those false idols and false priesthood going along with it, right? Well, you realize that the law of Moses called for their execution. All of Israel should march on tribes or anybody who does that in Israel. That's Deuteronomy 13, verses 12 through 15. Deuteronomy 13, verses 12 through 15. Again, this is the law of Moses. If you hear someone in one of your cities, which the Lord your God gives you to dwell in, saying, corrupt men have gone out from among you and enticed the inhabitants in their city, saying, let us go and serve other gods, gods which you have not known, then you shall inquire, search out, and ask diligently. And if it is indeed true and certain, if it is indeed true and certain that such an abomination was committed among you, you shall surely strike the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying it, all that is in it and its livestock with the edge of the sword. So this outrage should have already been executed on Dan, because the law of Moses calls on that. Now, the law of Moses does call on the execution of these men of Gibeah too. But that's why I'm asking, is this selective outrage? Well, it's we can just, that idolatry, that's their own business. Right? We don't have a right to judge others or whatever, however you want to word it, right? And I'm just saying, why the selective outrage? Are you going to be dedicated to God and His Word, or are you not? And you can't be if you're just going to select what appeals to the current contemporary thinking. Does that make sense? So, that's a question I have as I read through Judges 20. That seems like some pretty selective outrage. These chapters go together for a reason. Chapters 17 and 18 have to do with religious corruption. And chapters 20 through 22 have to do with moral corruption. Okay? But both are condemned in God's Word, and God gives commands regarding both. But they're not really outraged against Dan, but they are outraged against Gibeah. So, I don't know, that's just something to think about. You either have to imbibe the biblical worldview and learn and strive to love what God loves and hate what God hates, whether it's moral atrocity or religious idolatry, right? You should hate false doctrine, even if it doesn't necessarily directly tie to one's moral conduct. You should hate it because it's wrong and it goes against God's Word. And you should respond as God's Word tells you to. But it's pretty easy to overlook things that keep us comfortable, right? If it's better to overlook it in order to maintain our comfort, we'll do that. So that's what I'm saying here. And then I asked that question in number 3 there, can a depraved society still be outraged by moral atrocity? So we've reached the bottom of the barrel, but we ask, this man mails out these body parts and says, what, see how terrible this is? And you're like, man, is anybody going to be affected by this and say, listen, we need reform. We need to do something about that. I keep thinking and hoping that the general population of America will wake up and see how destructive this ideology is for your kids and your grandkids, especially, right? I mean, they're actually now going into the schools to groom and to prepare the next generation to fully embrace, and they're urging people to identify as all of these different aberrations, to natural order. And that's child abuse. That's child abuse. And so, I asked the question, can a depraved society be outraged? I hope so. I hope that we can wake up to an extent where we can regain a little bit of our senses. But, as Christians, we just have to keep upholding the truth and protect our children and do what's necessary to let the people around you know that there is a truth, there is a king in Israel, and we should do what is right in his eyes. All right? Verses 12 through 17 is the tribes, the entire tribe of Benjamin, their pride and prejudice, I say here. So verses 12 and following, it says, So Then the tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, what is this wickedness that has occurred among you? Now therefore deliver up the men, the perverted men who are in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and remove the evil from Israel. So all of that is good, I think. All of that is what should be done. But the children of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of their brethren, the children of Israel. Instead, the children of Benjamin gathered together from their cities to Gibeah to go to battle against the children of Israel. So that, I think, answers that first question I asked about, is this a justified war against an entire tribe? Now it is. And I have a cross-reference here that from Romans 1, 26 through 32. And it's a striking passage that I think is a great descriptor of what's going on here with Benjamin. They're actually defending the men of Gibeah now. They're defending them. Rather than seeking justice, they're defending the perpetrators. I'm going to read from Romans 1. I know that I'm never going to get through my notes, but that's okay. Romans 1. And you all remember this passage, right? But notice the progression here. Romans 1, 26. For this reason, as he talked about exchanging God for the lie, for this reason God gave them all up to vile passions. Even their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature, and likewise also the men. Leaving the natural use of the woman, they burned in their lust for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error, which was due. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind, to do those things which are not fitting. And now this terrible black list of showing the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, right? Being filled with all unrighteousness and sexual immorality and wickedness and covetousness and maliciousness, full of envy and murder and strife and deceit. Well, it sounds like we're reading the book of Judges, doesn't it? Verse 30, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, and disobedient to parents. Verse 31, they're undiscerning and untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful. Now, that's pretty bad. Now, verse 32 says, they know the righteous judgment of God, and that is that those who practice such things are deserving of death. So they know that this is God's view of things, but what is their view? Well, they not only practice the same thing, but they give their approval to those who practice those things too. So here is gone full circle, I think, and I've mentioned this before in past classes, how in our own culture it works this way, and it has worked this way. The catchword used to be tolerance, where you're supposed to tolerate other people's viewpoint. In other words, the idea of tolerance implies that you don't agree with it. If you agreed with it, you don't have to tolerate it. There's nothing to tolerate. So it was acceptable to disagree with it, but you're just not supposed to say anything, right? That's tolerance. And just say, to each his own. Now what is the catchword? Acceptance. Promotion. It's not just enough to tolerate it now. You have to agree that it is an equally viable alternative. And then further than that, what are you supposed to do? Embrace it. Promote it. And if you don't, you're an immoral person. So that's their standard of morality, is this whole woke ideology. If you want to be moral, according to that standard of morality, you need to be woke. You need to be promoting these immoralities and this child abuse that we've been describing. And so that is exactly what you see Benjamin doing here.
So I think with the transgender movement with the kids, if you have a kid that's not worth being raised by that, and they say, you know what, I think I'm going to identify as the opposite sex, and the parent doesn't promote the resources that's out there for them, then the parent is now being looked at as abusive.
And it's just a matter of time before laws are passed where the parents will be arrested or the children will be taken away from the parents. I mean, it's a world of hurt and heartbreak. It's already happening in various places. And again, I think I brought this up again, but it's so striking, and I'll get to your comment, Mark, that You know, you mentioned if a parent's children identify as transgender, they're supposed to support that. There are a lot of parents who are actually promoting in their own children to identify as transgender. And I mentioned a few things that I saw, you know, where women are bewailing the fact that their female child is embracing things that are pink and Disney princesses. You know, they're like, I did everything I could to keep everything neutral, and yet she still wants girly things. And so she's beside herself over that, and you just want to, because that's terrible. Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say that when all this stuff first came to light a year or two ago, Governor Abbott said the parents need to be investigated.
Oh yeah, you're talking about those who are promoting. Yeah, well, you know, that just shows the different political ideologies that are behind it. You know, conservatives, thankfully, at least to a large degree still, can see that this is destructive. It won't stay that way long. I mean, I think conservatives will eventually embrace a lot of this stuff. They already are starting to embrace a lot of the homosexual lifestyle and things like that as equally viable, but we don't have time to get into all that. But it's go ahead.
Just like the parents have got to take hold. McDonald's is being sued again because a 4-year-old burned their mouth on a chicken nugget. They send it up to the
Okay.
parent to make sure that the food's not too hot for the child to eat.
Yeah, there are various, you know, in our litigious society, various things that people get all broken up about and so forth that are things that as older people we would never even imagine that when we were growing up. I mean, of course, if we rode a bicycle with a helmet on, we got wedgies, you know. Can I say that? But again, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just pointing out stuff. But no, here's before class is over, I really got to make this point. The whole reason that we bring this out of these texts is certainly not just so that we can sit in here and point at everybody else and say how bad everybody else is. The point is that it's instructing us what world we live in so that we can be, as Ephesians 5 says, be circumspect and understand the times and be able to address it with our families, with our children, with our grandchildren, with our friends, with our families, and then, of course, be in a position, many of us, to talk to the school boards where our children go or our neighbors' children go. And this is a world we live in, and it's a world that's unlike the world of the 1950s and the 1960s. Those decades had their immoralities. I'm not saying they didn't. And there's a lot of problems throughout human history. I'm not saying there's not. But I'm addressing what's going on, especially increasingly so in our own culture with the promotion of these kinds of things that God would call an abomination. So please don't leave this class without making sure you get that in your mind, that we're not just trying to sit back and point fingers at everybody. We're saying, you're a Christian, you're a child of God, and so live in this world as such and keep the Word of God in your minds so that you can love other people and shed the gospel of Jesus Christ, the light of the gospel, into their hearts so that they can be saved. That's what this is all about. And it's all by God's grace. It's by God's grace that you're even here today, right? So you're not inherently better than anybody else. You're just better off because of Jesus and because of the grace of God. And we want everybody to embrace that, don't we? That's what this is all about. So I don't know if we even made it halfway, but that's okay. We'll... I wasn't really going to go into any more in the next class, but we'll see how we'll work next class. Thank you guys so much. Guess what's next? The book of Ruth. I'll probably end up just preaching a sermon series on it. I'm going to start one this morning, as a matter of fact. So we will figure out our next steps afterwards. Thank you guys so much for your attention. We'll be dismissed.